8 months later.
次の検査は来週の同じ時間になりますので、お大事に。
はい、ありがとうございました。
This is great. As she bowed to the nurse who she'd come to know quite well, Senri Minamisawa, the girl who was once Nono Kurisu, checked the time. It was almost noon. The exams were getting shorter and shorter. They hadn't even given her any drugs today. That probably meant she was getting better. Also, they don't look like old people. Uki Yamazoe, whose exam had evidently been as short as hers, came down from the psych ward on the 5th floor. When she saw Senri, she ran over.
姉さんも今日は終わり？こーら、病院内は走らない。はい、ごめんなさい。
Senri felt herself smile as she watched her little sister walk fast, but not run, toward the front desk. Her little sister had struggled with her physical therapy, but now she could walk and run like a normal girl. She wanted to be a nurse just like Senri. It would be the perfect job for her. So she did actually go into nursing.
じゃあ行こっか。思ったより早かったからみんなをランチに誘ってみる？来てくれると思うわ。
Uki suddenly seemed to remember something and stopped.
忘れ物？その...
Uki was choosing her words carefully as she looked at the elevator that had just come down.
いいの？姉さん。
Did we talk to her? Senri put her hand on her little sister's head.
ちゃんと挨拶は済ませたでしょ？それでもう十分。それに最近は警備が厳重で誰も近寄れないわ。でもだからいいのよ、ウキ。そうしちゃダメなんだからね。
Her little sister nodded a second later, and Senri smiled.
定期検診お疲れ様です。お疲れ様です。
Oh, that's right! If the Chaos Child Syndrome cure worked, then Kazuki can just talk without repercussion. When she contacted them on her phone, she found that Hinaya Arimura and Hana Kazuki had both been waiting for her call all morning. They met in front of Shibuya Station and started walking. It had been a long time since the four of them had gone through the city together like this. They saw each other often at the hospital, but their exams and physical therapy were all at different times, which made it hard to schedule anything. But today was a special day. Even if they didn't say anything, they all knew they were going to meet.
今日、ユウは？ユウとなら学校のお友達と図書館へ行ったわ。うわ、せっかくの休みに図書館とか。末恐ろしいなあ、おい。
I can't believe he's going the library.
ユウは将来弁護士になるって張り切ってるから。おへえ、弁護士？子供の夢にしちゃずいぶん。って、あ
Oh, so that's it, Hinaya almost said, but she stopped herself. Both Hana and Hinaya immediately understood the meaning of Yuto Tachibana's childlike dream, as well as the fact that it might even come true. And Yuto knew what day it was, too. That had to have been why he went to the library with his friends, just like the four of them had gathered together. An indescribable sadness was threatening to build up between them. It was Arimura's loud voice that broke the silence.
皆の衆、のんびりしてるとどの店も満席になっちまいますぜ。そうね。どこで食べる？超お腹空いてるので、いつものカフェでいいと思います。どう？みんな。うん、それでいい。私もそこで。うん。じゃあそうしましょうか。はーい。ではお姉さんについてきてください。
Hinaya raised up one hand like a tour guide and wrapped the other around Hana's. The two of them had been hanging out together a lot recently. Then she plunged into the crowd. There were no Chaos Child Syndrome patients to be seen. 8 months ago, over 80% of the Chaos Child Syndrome patients in Shibuya all fell unconscious at once. They were all quickly split up and taken to nearby hospitals. The hospitals were overflowing with patients. It was almost like the earthquake 6 years ago. No, 7 years now. Even those patients who had escaped the initial wave quickly fell unconscious as well, and were also taken to hospitals. Fortunately, no one was seriously injured. Several people were injured when they'd fallen, but none of them badly. And several days later, the patients began to wake up, almost all of them in a state of extreme panic. They couldn't believe their real forms. Senri, Hinai, and the others woke up at the same time and were terribly confused. But they didn't panic like the others. That's right. I forgot there was no arc for Kurisu. She just woke up and was Senri because her power of looking like Kurisu was gone. That must have been a trip. They quickly realized that he was involved and that he'd done this for everyone's sake. And so all the patients returned to a normal but harsh reality.
南沢先輩、列から離れないでくださいよ。置いていっちゃいますよ。
ごめんなさい。
Senri realized that she'd stopped walking as she reflected on the past. She ran to catch up with the others. What had happened when she was asleep? Right after she'd woken up, Takaru had told her himself. Kunosato and Shinjo had let her meet him in a special hospital room. He also told her about Serika's true nature and the truth behind the return of the New Generation Madness. Wakui, the committee, and Chaos Child Syndrome too. He told her about everything. And lastly, he told her the truth about Sakuma, the father she believed in. And there was something that she, Senri Minamisawa, or Nono Kurisu depending, had to tell him too. Now that she didn't look like Nono Kurisu anymore, there was no way she could keep up the lie. She'd had trouble working up the courage before she went into Takaru's room. She'd hesitated so many times and almost thought about not meeting him at all. But it was the other girls from her room that had scolded her and urged her on. She'd been the last to wake up because of the wound in her chest, and by the time she did, Uki, Hinai, and Hana had already seen the real her. And everyone had forgiven her without saying a word. But when she'd hesitated about meeting Takaru, they got really mad. Can't you trust him, they asked? Is he the kind of guy who wouldn't forgive you? And that was enough for her to decide. After she told him everything, Takaru had laughed gently.
バカだな。もっと早く話してくれればよかったのに。
Every time she remembered his voice then, she felt like she would cry. Senri gave up her old name and body and went back to being herself. She'd been forced into 6 months of physical therapy, not just because of the syndrome, but the stab wound as well, but at last she was capable of going outside on her own. She'd gone back to Hekiho Academy, which was now just a normal private school, and started living the life of a normal student along with the others.
ごめんなさい。何？検査どうでしたか？いつも通りね。でももう薬も処方されてないし、そろそろ治療もおしまいかしら。和樹の方は？私もそうかも。
Kazuki looked up at the sky as she spoke. She'd been lying to everyone too. And just like Senri, she'd been reluctant to admit it, and Hinai had scolded her too. When she opened up to Takaru about her lie, he forgave her like nothing was wrong at all. Even after losing her power, Hana still didn't talk a lot, but she was trying her best. That was her promise to Takaru, she thought.
その声、みんなにもっと聞かせてあげるといいよ。友達も増えるんじゃないかな。
Shibuya was filled with people enjoying their day off, and Senri and the others were living the same lives as everyone else. Except for one person, the boy who'd been at their center. They'd only brought it up during a small silence after they'd eaten lunch at the usual cafe. At first, no one wanted to discuss it. But about the same time Senri had gotten tired of watching the ice melt in her iced tea, Hinai opened her mouth to speak.
見ましたか？
She pointed to the phone in her hand. It was displaying a gossip site. The article was about Takaru. It said that Takeru Miyashiro, the boy responsible for the serial killing in Shibuya, had been kept at Tokyo General Hospital to aid in research on Chaos Child Syndrome, and now that the research was mostly finished, he was finally being sent to a detention house for the real interrogations to begin. Even if he was a minor, in light of the effect his crimes had on society, the article said, there was no chance he'd ever be getting out. It said all that in sensational and exaggerated tones.
こういうのどこで調べるのかしらね、マスコミって。
Most of what the article said was right, and Shinjo had told them that the day Takeru would be transferred was today. They were able to say goodbye a while before. Shinjo had set it up.
本当に最後まであの子は。
The last time they'd met, Takeru had asked them for a favor. It involved Sarika Onoe. Stay away from her unless she comes to you. If she does come to you, forgive her, and treat her like a normal friend. That's going to be tougher for some than others. And never tell her about me or her past. He'd insisted on these 3 things until the very end.
でも
Sarika hadn't come to them at all. Kunosato had told them that she lived in Yokohama and was attending Hekeho from there, but they hadn't heard anything else.
今何してるのかな。
何してるのかしらね。
さあ。
No one was sure if Uki's question was about Takeru, or Sarika, or maybe both of them.
そろそろ行きましょうか。
When she stood up to go, Senri realized something. Oh, that's right. Maybe she was asking about us. What are we doing right now? Takeru had a spot in the cafe where he always sat. Senri found herself looking at it, and almost cried again. The 4 of them left the cafe and slowly headed for the station. They planned to split up and go home from there. None of them were looking at their phones, but their heads were all bent lower than normal, but no one noticed. Just before the light turned green, Senri realized that they were completely buried in the people surrounding them. Her mouth opened on its own.
映画でも見ていきましょうか。
The other 3 looked up in surprise. Their mouths fell in shock. They seemed to have been caught completely off guard.
このまま帰ってもまだ早いし。
She was right. The sun hadn't even begun to set. Hinae suddenly started to tear at her hair.
ダメだ。今日はこんな空気にならないようにしようと思ってきたのに。
Her twin tail spun angrily.
そんなこと考えてたんだ。そうじゃなきゃ彼氏でもないあんたと手つないだりとかしないって。最近よくつないでくるくせに。知らん。誰だそれは。
はいはい。じゃあ付き合ってくれるのね、映画。
バチコイ。
Hinae clapped her hands together and then spread her arms as if to give Senri a hug.
ウキはこの後予定ないでしょ。
うん。でも。
Uki made the same face she'd made at the hospital. Let's go back to the hospital after all, she seemed to say. It's almost time, isn't it? Senri knew Uki was worried about her, and that's when she smiled back, silently.
ありがとう。でも行くならやっぱり映画にしましょうね。
Because if she did meet Takeru, she would grab onto him and break down in tears. She didn't think she had it in her to control herself, and she didn't want to let her little brother see her like that. She was never going to let him worry about her again. So...
できれば楽しい映画がいいな。タクルに手紙を書きたいの。みんなで楽しい映画を見たわよって。
私も書く。お手紙毎日書く。
毎日？これは負けていられないわね。
おお、ブラコン姉妹ですな。
Hinaya tried to tease them, but they both looked back at her and spoke in unison, Senri mischievously and Uki extremely seriously.
いけない？自慢の弟なの。
自慢の兄です。 お
Hinai staggered back in exaggerated astonishment, and Senri gave her a pat to move her along.
ほら早く置いていくわよ。
Senri went to the front and started the walk. Unlike a moment ago, she was standing tall, ready to face whatever fate had in store for her. Uki went after, her footsteps steady and firm as well. The remaining two looked at each other for a moment, and then they started to laugh and ran to catch up to the sisters.
あー待ってくださいよ先輩ウキ
映画ならおすすめのあるんですけど。
花のおすすめはいつもバカ映画すぎて話になんない。
Huh? That's strange. There was supposed to be data in here.
おい、勝手に触るなと何度も言ってるだろう。
The door opened and an angry Kunosato came inside.
すいません。
あいつらの結果ならいつも通りクリーンだ。今のところ再発の恐れはない。
I gave a small sigh of relief when I heard that. Good. The treatment seemed to be working well.
それで、いつまで千里たちの検査って続くんですか？
お前、これから連れて行かれるときに人の心配なんて。まあいい。そういうやつだったな、お前は。
Kunosato sighed in resignation.
今あいつらに行っているのは染色体に異常が見られないかどうかの検査だけだ。まあ健康診断みたいなものだが、少なくとも老化の原因が完全に突き止められるまでは検査は続ける。今は週に1回だが、検査回数は徐々に減らしていく予定だ。
いつ頃から減らしていけるんです？
I don't know, Kunosato said. From the way she was talking, she wasn't lying. She really didn't know. My role in researching and curing Chaos Child Syndrome had mostly come to an end after I created that image. All that was left was for Kunosato and the regular scientists helping her to figure out the scientific cause. But they seemed to be having a hard time figuring out what caused the artificial aging process. As for what they knew now, there were structures called telomeres at the ends of a chromosome, which were related to the aging process in some way. Yeah, I've heard of those. I think they even addressed that briefly in, like, a throwaway line in Police Knots. A repeated set of base pairs at the end of a chromosome. Since it has been confirmed that they get shorter with each cell division, and telomere shortening has been seen in patients suffering from accelerated aging disorders, it is believed that they are deeply connected with cellular aging, and thus with the aging of the entire body. There were signs that Chaos Child Syndrome patients were artificially creating them inside their bodies. These false telomeres shortened at a greatly accelerated rate that drastically restricted the number of times a cell could divide. The hypothesis was that the brain recognized these artificial telomeres as real and initiated the aging process. But much of that was still in the realm of hypothesis, and Kunosato herself didn't seem satisfied with the explanation at all. But whatever the underlying principle was, when I asked her what had happened, she shrugged and said this.
精神や肉体がこう勘違いしているせいじゃないか。妄想の世界で生きるということは新しい自分に生まれ変わることだとな。
そうか。精神的な勘違いだけじゃなく、肉体的にも勘違いをしたんだ。
The phenomenon where these mistakes, or errors, would occur along the chromosome had been known in the medical world for a long time. That's right. It was the same mechanism as cancer. In other words, former Chaos Child Syndrome patients were at a high risk of developing that disease. Senri and the others would probably keep getting exams to look for those errors in their cells, all without knowing why. And according to Kunosato, she had no idea when those exams might end. They might go on forever.
実は、お前に関して興味深いことがあるんだが。
ん？
Kunosato stared at me as if trying to peer into the bottom of my heart.
これから先、 かなり長い間お前はインターネットにアクセスできなくなる。生まれて初めてのことじゃないか。
Yeah, come to think of it, she was right. The internet already existed when I was born, and by the time I hit puberty, it was everywhere.
情報強者を自認していたお前がその最大の手段を失い情報の規制を受ける。場合によっては情報から遮断されるかもしれない。そういう生活が当然となった時、お前の思考回路はそれまでとどう変化するんだろうな。
A while ago, I might have panicked just thinking about it. But strangely, I didn't feel like it now.
激しい情報の波にさらされていたお前と波の全くない静かな海に漂うお前、精神的にどう変化するか楽しみだよ。
前に約束しましたから実験台にしていいですよ。
ああ、そうだったな。
伊藤のやつは症候群だけでなく脳の方も随分回復してきたそうですね。助かりました。
助かったのは医学的な面だ。法的なことは知らんぞ。
Shinjo had told me that Ito would be prosecuted, but in the end, he'd probably be given treatment at a medical facility for minors. I didn't know how long it would take, but I was relieved to know that he'd eventually go free. Remembering Yui made my heart ache, but it wasn't his fault.
久野里さんはこれからどうするつもりです？
I remembered something I wanted to ask before I left this place. Kunosato's eyebrows rose in surprise.
委員会への復習を続けるつもりですか？
当然だ。涌井が言った通り、私は踊り続けるさ。
And then, I saw a little smile form around her mouth.
そうか。なるほど。もしかしたらお前とは長い付き合いになるかもしれんな。涌井はお前のことを観測し続ける。そう言ったんだろ。
ええ。
この先お前が自分に降りかかってくる状況に絶望し、あるいは恐怖し、再びギガロマニアックスとしての力を取り返してしまうか否か、それが奴とのゲームというわけだ。
ええ。
だったらお前は生かされ続ける。私もお前の観測を続けよう。奴の尻尾をつかむためにな。
いいか？
There was a knock at the door, and I heard a voice I knew well. Shinjo came in with a serious look on his face. He was looking at me, seemingly uncertain as to what to say. I waited, motionless, until finally he sighed. Shinjo said the words.
時間だ。
はい。
I slowly stood up from the chair. Shinjo knew the truth, but still accepted my decision. I could do nothing but be grateful for that. I knew how hard that had to be for a detective.
今までありがとうございました。苦労かけました。
I bowed deeply.
いや、君に比べたらどうということはないさ。
That is true. He put his hand on my shoulder. It was big and strong. If I had an older brother, would he have been like this?
俺の方こそありがとう。
There was another detective on the other side of the door, ready to take me to the transport. The rest of the world still didn't really know what I looked like after I'd recovered from Chaos Child Syndrome. It was Shinjo who had convinced the others that I'd stand out less if they didn't put handcuffs on me and try to hide my face. Thanks to that, I'd be able to walk outside as a normal high school kid one last time. I bowed one last time to Shinjo and then turned to Kunosato.
みんなのことよろしく頼みます。
ああ。またな。
Kunosato nodded weakly and I nodded back. And then I headed for the exit.
ああ。宮代。
I stopped and turned around.
危うく聞き忘れるところだった。取り立てて重要なことではないんだが。彼女の名前と年齢だ。なぜ 彼女は尾上セリカだったんだ。年齢に意味はあったのか。
Yeah, we did have a whole name for her. Age? Like a year younger than us or something? It was actually something I'd been thinking about for a long time after we were first apart. It was the first step of a very big mistake. When I'd finally found the answer, I'd burst out laughing.
名前は僕の両親の名前をローマ字書きしたアナグラムでした。
Really? Saneo Miyashiro? Eriko Miyashiro? Unreal.
本当の親に求めるようなことを僕は彼女に求めていたんでしょうね。だからそんな名前にしたんだと思います。
でも親の役割を彼女に求めたのなら年上に設定するはずだろ。
And also, not relying on us all the time?
そんな風に親を求めている自分を認めたくなかったんです。だから彼女は年上ではいけなかった。僕が守るべき年下の女の子でなければいけなかった。子供ながらにつまらないプライドですね。今考えると本当に愚かでした。
そうか。
If I wasn't mistaken, I caught a glimpse of gentleness in her expression.
でもお前はちゃんと彼女を守った。今はもう愚かじゃないさ。
I smiled back at her and turned away. I made my stride a little longer than usual so my resolve wouldn't waver, and then I stepped out the door. It had been forever since I'd been outside, and the weather was beautiful. I was so used to the darkness that the strong sunlight stung my eyes. The wind was a little cold, but it felt good. It swirled by as if purifying my whole body. I was surprised not to see any reporters or gawkers, but I learned later that Kei, aka Kunosato, had given the media and internet false information. I walked for a while until I saw a black car stopped on the side of the road. It was probably the transport car. I felt a sense of deja vu and stopped to look around, and then I remembered.
そうか。
This was a corner of AH Tokyo General Hospital. 6 years ago, during the earthquake, it had been an evacuation shelter. The detective saw that I stopped and asked me what was wrong, but there were too many feelings inside me to explain. That's right. This is where I created her. I stood there in silent shock. We had the heartbeat thing? Are we doing something? Nearby in the bright sunlight, just a few seconds away if I were to run. No kidding. She was standing there. The girl I thought for sure I'd never meet again. She was looking at me as if uncertain whether to smile, cry, or get mad. There was a girl next to her that I didn't know, about the same age. Why?
なんでここに。
I couldn't look away. I couldn't move. We were so close, but we were staring at each other across a distance that could never be crossed. The detective told me to start walking. I couldn't answer. I realized that my fists were clenched.
セリカ？何？
I heard a pretty voice. The soft wind seemed to be carrying it to me.
どうしたのいきなり。誰あれ？知ってる人？
I didn't know what feelings were being exchanged between us, but I could see tears forming in her eyes.
知らない人。
And the tears fell without a sound. She was smiling. The girl next to her must have been her best friend. She wiped away her tears and smiled so that her friend wouldn't see them. And then she turned around and walked away from me. Time started to move again, and a smile formed on my face as well.
僕も君なんて知らない。
The sun stung my eyes. I looked up at the sky, so that the sudden tears wouldn't fall to the ground. I was crying tears of joy. That's what I believed. That's what I had to believe. Everything was for the best.
すいません。行きましょう。
I said to the detective. Then I started to walk. I didn't look at her as she got further away. We would never see each other again, and the paths we walked would never cross. That was how we would live our lives together. Silent Sky End. There it is. And with that, we got all the event CG, the tips, every track in the game, and we have mastered Chaos Child. And by the way, notice the graffiti, the sumo stickers are just gone. It's a clean city now. We have done it. And this game was something else. Well, we have done it. We have beaten Chaos Child, and what an adventure it was. We took care of the alternate paths too, and man, those went places. They went from shockingly dark to shockingly depressing, even for this game, to just shocking. We got a happy ending, that was crazy enough, but then we had Kazuki's path? Well, what can I say? That thing was freaking nuts. It felt like we were playing a different video game. This game is wild. And I gotta say, regarding the true path, I found it pretty interesting that we didn't have this big, epic clash with Wakui like we had done with Kazuki's path, or that we did in the normal path with Sakuma. It was more of a talk, which I found actually an interesting change of pace. And Wakui ended up being just like the devil. Very well, I will just go away. I'll be watching you. You know, that whole thing. It was an interesting and safe, though rather unsettling, kind of ending, but it looks like that's what we were looking for. We got probably the best ending we could with the circumstances we had. And I appreciate this mention from the comments, but there were a lot of things that paralleled aspects of other Science Adventures games. I mostly heard from Steins Gate. For example, the Committee of 300 is the general villain of the entire Science Adventure series. I don't think they usually directly interfere. There's a thing you have to take care of in each game. In Steins Gate, it's to save the life of one of your friends. In Chaos Child, it's to solve this murder mystery. But the Council of 300, or the Committee of 300, is there watching and maybe lightly affecting things, and you know they're bad, but you can't really deal with them. They're just kind of around, and maybe something will come of that eventually. I have no idea. Additionally, there are interesting parallels with characters, too. I didn't know this because I never played Chaos Head, but Takeru and Serika look like they're the main characters, their counterparts, I guess, in Chaos Head, and the main characters both have Taku names. Takeru is obsessed with not Mountain Dew, Mountain View, and I forgot about this actually, but Okabe in Steins Gate was obsessed with Dr. Pepper. I don't know if it was a localization or if it was actually in the source material, but I think they just called it Dr. P, and it's like, you know what this means. Kunosato's super hacker friend, I probably should have guessed this one, but I didn't. Probably Daru from Steins Gate. That guy's bizarre, but he's a technical genius. Oh, there were other things too. Oh yeah, you're trying to save in Steins Gate, and the possible love interest, Makisu Kurisu, and Chaos Child has Kurusu, who's maybe, possibly, could be a love interest, I guess, and there are cases where she could die. In Steins Gate, I forgot how much of a character she was, but one of their friends I think she worked at a maid cafe, and she has this like exaggerated like cosplay looking kind of outfit for her job. And then you have just the waitress in Chaos Child, who's not much of a character, but it's like, hey, we got a parallel going. One thing I thought was interesting that I did not consider at the time was Kazuki. Because, of course, like probably most people when they played this, they thought she was either mute or maybe selectively mute. So, this is an interesting kind of character to look into for this game. And I have to admit, I was kind of disappointed when it turns out that she can talk whenever she wants. It's just that she doesn't want to because people could die when she does. She otherwise would have been a normal person, but, oh no, there's this psychic power. Really? That's what it was? But I forgot, Steins Gate did have a very quiet character, and I forgot why. I forgot if she was selectively mute or just shy or what. I know she could talk, but it was rare. And she would communicate typically via text on her cell phone. So, Kazuki was the twist on that. It's just hard to tell, because this is the first science adventure game that I played. So it's not, oh, I thought they were doing something with Kazuki. Oh, it wasn't that. We're supposed to be basing off of earlier material, and what a twist! Kazuki can talk whenever she wants, but she could cause the apocalypse, which is why she doesn't. Oh. That was a surprise that was supposed to be a twist on a pre-existing, I don't know if I'd say formula, but pattern you think you know. As for the general plot of the game, going back and looking at my my installments as I edited them, I thought it was pretty amusing how rarely I called plot twists and reveals, but how often I called particular pieces of evidence that would probably come into play later. I didn't know how, and I was usually wrong, but it was like, pay attention to this, and it was usually right. I think the only thing I called, and it was kind of as a joke, was that Kurisu is Senrei. I was just basing it on the long hair. I know that's a really weak connection, but there was that mention of how Kurisu said she was pretty sure he went into the hospital basement alone, and that didn't make sense to me, because we didn't know her before the earthquake, and the hospital basement was before the earthquake. So, what does that mean? The only way she could have known anything about the hospital basement is if we told her. And if we told her, we would have said that we went down with Serica. So her calling shenanigans on that made no sense to me, except that she was Senri and she personally saw us in the basement. That was an amazing reveal. That I came close to calling that aspect of it. But I didn't quite get there. But I remember finding it suspicious at the very least. One thing I did call many times that turned out to be wrong was Arimura. I noticed she had black bows in her hair when we first met her, and then white later. And I know people can change clothes, but this is a visual novel with specific art for each character, so I was wondering if that might be a subtle clue. No. She wore white bows the next day. I don't know. What can I say? I was really putting all of my chips on that one, too. Like, just you wait, and it didn't amount to anything. I was able to call not Serica's actual motivation, but I did call that she was the one who killed Takeru's parents because Takeru wished it. I thought that was Takeru's big wish. And it wasn't, but that's kind of cheating because he basically wished for her to do anything he wanted, and I included that. So I was a little borderline on that one. But it's just really fun to see all these possible threads you could go on and then make guesses based on them and just see where they go. Because this game goes places. It was a blast. And that's really what we're after. I mean, this was my first foray into a science adventure game. I saw the Steins Gate anime a long time ago, but it's been a while and I forgot lots of aspects of it that would have been little flags in Chaos Child. So, what can I say? Thank you very much for watching this playthrough. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed playing it. And thank you to Salbert for selecting this game for me to play in the first place. And also, this may sound a little weird. I want to see if they're on the game box. I'm not 100% sure about this. I know it's on... Yeah, it's on the list of companies on the bottom. But I want to give a shout out to the company Mages that contributed to making this game, because not that you can tell what happens behind the scenes in my Let's Plays, but almost every single video I uploaded of this game got copyright flagged for music, but with almost every single example of this, either characters were talking over it, I was talking over it or both, and I disputed all these claims, and remembering that this Let's Play is 84 parts, and some videos are more than one part each. There's a lot of videos that I've been uploading over the course of like 2.5 months, more than that. And I've been disputing things almost daily, and Mages released the copyright claims at most after a few days, at least after a few hours. Whoever is managing their YouTube stuff has been extremely patient with me, so I really appreciate that. So that was Chaos Child. It was pretty amazing, and now I'm curious about looking into more of the Science Adventure games. I know there's Chaos Head, there's Steins Gate, Steins Gate Zero, there's Robotics Notes. I'm not sure if there's others, but I wouldn't be surprised. So who knows, maybe I'll look into those at some other point. As for the next game, we're definitely going in a different direction, and I hope you enjoy. Until next time, everyone.